So far in this course, we have covered 3 sections, where in the section number 1, we understood about the very basic fundamentals of topology. Then we moved forward to the second section where we modeled a sci-fi pistol, and along with that, we also covered a lot of different tools and techniques which can help to make the topology of an object better. Then in the section number 3, we covered some more topology techniques, and now from this video onwards, we'll be starting with the section number 4 that deals with the modeling of this open book, and along with that, our focus in this video will be to create the basic structure of our model, and then we'll continue to add further details in the upcoming videos. So to begin with modeling the open book, I'll first delete all of these objects by pressing A and X to delete, and after that I'll be adding a plane in the scene. Now switch to the top view, then go to the edit mode. After this, with all the vertices selected, let's move this up in the y-axis by 1 meters, and similarly let's also move it in the x-axis by 1 meters. By doing this, we'll have the origin of this plane over here at the 3D cursor. And now moving ahead, the next thing that we'll do is to select these two vertices and slightly move it up in the y-axis. Similarly, let's also increase its width by moving these vertices in the x-axis. And now once we have adjusted the size, the next thing that we'll do is to select these two vertices over here, then press E to extrude them in the x-axis, basically in the negative direction. This will basically help us to build some geometry for this object that we'll later on use while attaching the pages with the back cover of the book. Now since this will be the page of the open book that we are gonna make, so we also need to add some loop cuts so that later on, if we wish to add some details to the geometry, it will be easier for us. So to add the loop cuts, or basically the edges, press Ctrl R, and with the cursor over here, use the scroll wheel to increase the number of loop cuts to something like 3 or 4, then left click and then right click to cancel the movement. After this, return back to the object mode, and currently we only have a very simple plane in the scene with no visible thickness, no geometry, and so in order to give this plane some thickness, we'll be using a modifier known as the solidify modifier. So to use it, first go to the modifier properties, then go to add modifier, and in the generate category, select the solidify modifier. Now this particular modifier will allow you to add some thickness to this plane so that it can be used to prepare the model of our open book. So over here, you have the option to control the thickness. If I increase it, the thickness of the plane will increase, but to give it a realistic appearance, we have to keep this value to a very small number, for example 0.05, or maybe let's reduce it further to 0.02. So depending upon how thick you want the paper, you can adjust this thickness value to the required amount. And now the next thing that we'll do is to adjust the position of the plane's origin. Currently, it is located at the position of the 3D cursor. However, it would be much better if we could keep the origin point to somewhere over here in the middle, because in that case, the operations like rotation and scaling will be much better and easier. Currently, if I try to rotate it, then the rotation will happen around this origin point, which right now doesn't look very nice. So to fix this problem, let's switch to the edit mode, and suppose we want the origin point to be somewhere over here that is equally distant from these 2 points. And to do this thing, with both of these vertices selected, just use the shortcut Shift S, which opens up this snap menu, then take your cursor to this option which is cursor to selected, and then left click. By doing this, you will have the 3D cursor placed at the average position of the selected vertices, and after this process, go back to the object mode, and now we have to place this little origin point to over here at the 3D cursor. For this, go to the object menu on the top, then go to set origin and select the origin to 3D cursor. This will change the position of the origin to that of the 3D cursor in the 3D viewport. And now you can see the changes in the object mode. If you try to rotate the object or maybe scale, then the point around which the rotation or the scaling will happen is the origin point. And for now, I have rotated this particular page by an angle of 90 degrees in the y-axis. Now moving ahead, the next thing that we'll do is to create a bending in this page. And to achieve this result, we have to use another modifier, which is the curve modifier. To see how it works, with the plane selected, just go to the modifier properties, then add modifier, then in the deform, we'll be selecting the curve modifier. Now this particular modifier asks you to choose a curve object in the scene, which currently we don't have, and then it asks you to choose a deform axis. What this all basically means is that you can deform or basically bend this object depending upon the shape of a curve. So to add a curve object in the scene, press Shift A, then go to curve and select Bezier. This will add the Bezier curve into our scene. Now switch to the top view, go to the edit mode, and with both of the points selected, I'll first move it in the x-axis like this, and after that I'll first make this Bezier curve completely flat. And to do this thing, you basically have to select this particular point over here and then rotate it by 45 degrees. This is because the default Bezier curve has this particular point rotated by an angle of 45 degrees in order to give it a curved appearance. Now the next thing that we'll do is to get some more points on this curve so that we can deform it as per our own needs. So press A to select all, then right click and select subdivide, and this will add this point in the center, which we'll then use to deform or bend the curve. Now to create the curve with this point selected over here, I'll move this up in the z-axis, and by doing this, you'll be able to see some deformation in the curve that we wanted to achieve. Now currently, the curve looks perfect on the top, however, it kind of flattens at the beginning and the end. And to fix this, we have to switch to the edit mode, then select the right handle of the first point, and after that, also select this left handle of the ending point. Then with both of these handles selected, simply move them up in the z-axis, and this will result in the formation of a curve which is even, and it is completely perfect for our purpose. Now moving ahead, in order to use this curve to deform the plane, we have to select it, then go to the curve modifier, and in the curve object, simply select the Bezier curve. Now the results might be different from what you expected, and this is because of the deform axis that is selected over here. By default, the x-axis is selected, but if you try to change it to something else, then the results will be different each and every time. So what's basically happening here is that whatever axis is selected over here, the plane in the scene will follow the curve in that particular axis. For example, with the x-axis selected, when I move this plane in the x-axis, then it follows the shape of curves and bends in the x-axis. As a result, you have to find that particular axis which will give us the perfect bending result. For example, in this particular case, with the minus z-axis selected, if I move the plane down in the z-axis, it gives us a perfect sliding movement of the page along the curve. Now, if I press tab to enter the edit mode, then we'll notice that the plane gets back to the original position. So what I'm going to do is that I'll go to the curve modifier and turn on this option, which is to display the modifier in the edit mode. And now I'll press A to select all and move it down in the z-axis. Then we are able to see a similar motion of the plane along the curve. After this, I'll move this plane down in the z-axis by around 2 meters, and this will ensure that the page of the book is bended like this following the curve, and over here we have this part separated for the binding of the book. Now the reason why it's not completely smooth and you're able to see the creased edges on this page or the plane is that we are having very low number of edges in the mesh, and to fix this, we'll be using a modifier which will basically smooth out the geometry of this plane object. So with this selected, I'll go to the modifier properties, then add modifier, generate, and select the subdivision surface modifier. And by adding this modifier, you will notice some changes in the shape and the geometry of the selected object. Now by changing the value of the levels viewport, you can basically set the amount of subdivisions or the smoothness in the object's geometry. Also, one more thing to take care while using these modifiers is that the order in which these modifiers are placed is also very significant. With the solidify modifier placed first, it means that the first modifier that will be applied out of the three to this object will be the solidify modifier. After that, on the object with the solidify modifier applied, the curve modifier will be used, and on that we'll have the subdivision surface modifier applied. This also means that if I try to change the order of any of these modifiers by left clicking over here and dragging the modifier up and down, then this will change the way how these modifiers are applied to the selected object. In this particular case, I'll be keeping the subdivision surface modifier after the solidify one, and this is because it will be better to have the plane with the solidify modifier applied first, then the subdivision to smooth it out, and in the end, the plane object having both the solidify and the subdivision modifier applied will then follow the path of this curve because of the curve modifier. And now before moving forward, I'll increase the levels viewport value from 2 to a value of 3 for a smoother surface. Now the next thing that we'll be doing is to make the corners of the plane a little bit sharper. Right now, they appear to be rounded because of applying the subdivision surface modifier. However, we need to make some changes in this base mesh which is visible in the edit mode, and the tool that we are going to use will be the loop cut tool. So I'll press Ctrl R, then use the scroll wheel to increase the number of loop cuts to a value of 2, then left click to finalize and right click to cancel the movement. After this, to spread them out in the Y axis, I'll press S, then Y, and scale them up like this. And by doing this, you will notice that the corners of the page are also getting flat. So let's keep it till here and left click, and after this, I'll do a similar thing on the top part and the bottom part. So press Ctrl R, then add a loop cut over here. Let's move it up and left click. After this, for the bottom part, press Ctrl R, add a loop cut over here, slide it down and left click. With this, we now have this page ready in the scene which is close to perfection because we made it smoother with the subdivision surface modifier, curved because of the curve modifier. Also, we applied some thickness by using the solidify modifier, and just right now, we also made the corners of the page sharper with the use of the loop cut tool. Now, if you remember, we decided that this left side of the plane will be used for the binding purposes and the right side will be used for making the page of the book. And as a result, we'll now be focusing on making this part of the plane, which will be used for the binding, stand vertically down by adjusting the position and other parameters of the Bezier curve. So I've gone into the edit mode of the Bezier curve. Then I'll select this point over here along with both of these handles. Let's go to the front view, and after this, I'll press R to rotate this. But because of rotating it, this particular part of the page close to the binding no longer gives a natural appearance. And to fix this, we basically have to subdivide in order to get some more points. So I'll select these 2 points over here, then right click and select subdivide. With this we have one more point added over here in the middle of the 2 selected points, and this particular point will now allow us to easily flatten this part of the plane which is for the book binding. So I've switched to the front view, and with this point selected, if I just slowly move it in the x-axis and then select this point over here, press R to rotate it, then you will notice that this time the bending of this part with respect to the page is much better and smoother. You just have to move this point like this, and after that adjust the rotation value in order to make this almost perfectly vertical. Right now I've made this part of the plane completely flat, and then over here we have this page of the open book. After this, another thing that we need to focus on is that this end of the page should be touching the x-axis, and this is because later on we'll be having several pages, and so it's better that we make this x-axis the base or the ground on which the pages fall. So to fix this, I'll simply select this particular point, then press R to rotate it like this, press G to move it up in the z-axis, and left click to finalize. And by doing this, we now have this end of the page touching the x-axis. Now even though we have used the subdivision surface modifier on this page of the open book, so we do expect that the page should be much smoother because of more subdivisions and more vertices. However, on this particular part where basically the book will bind, we see a kind of flat surface, and the best way to fix this is to first of all ensure that both the parts are not completely perpendicular to each other, and to ensure this you simply have to select a point here and slightly rotate it in the y-axis like this in such a way that the angle is not completely perpendicular, as you can see here, which also results in a smoother surface. After this, for the overall smoothness, switch back to the object mode, select the plane, then right click and apply shade smooth. Now obviously the open book that we are modeling won't be having just a single page, and so to form multiple pages we'll be using a modifier which is the array modifier. To use it, with the plane selected, go to the modifier properties, then add modifier. In the generate category, select the array modifier. This will allow us to add multiple copies of the pages in our scene, where the number of these copies depend upon the count number. Also, you can use these XYZ values in the relative offset to change the distance between the arrayed items. Now to model our book, we'll need the pages to be very close to one another. So for now, the first thing that I'll do will be to change the number of pages from 8 to something like 5 or 6, and after that I'll be reducing the X value of the relative offset in order to bring the pages closer to one another, or basically to reduce the distance between the two pages. Over here, I've set the value of X to negative 0.03, which is causing the pages to be very close to each other, and that too in the downward direction. For now, I think that a value of around minus 0.02 can work fine for a purpose of creating the pages. After this, I'll now go to the Z factor in the relative offset and will slightly change it from 0 to something like minus 0.01, or maybe let's keep this to minus 0.005 to move the pages like this. Now some of you might be confused that why is it that on changing the factor X, the pages move up and down, that is the movement in the Z axis, whereas on changing the factor Z, the pages are moving in the X axis. And if that doubt just popped into your head, then it's time for you to go back and watch the Blender Master course, because it's a pretty basic thing about the global and the local axis. But yes, if you don't have the time to go back and watch everything again, then I'll explain it to you in lesser time with a simple example. So right now in the scene, you can see that we have x-axis which is red colored, the y-axis which is green colored, and over here, the one pointing towards the top is the z-axis which is the blue colored. You can even see it by going to the viewport overlays and turning on the z-axis. But this is not the only axis which is there in the 3D viewport. This one is known as the global axis, and apart from this, every object in the scene has its own personal axis which is known as the local axis. To view them, simply go to the object properties, then go to viewport display and turn on the show axis. This will allow us to see the local axis of an object simply by selecting it in the 3D viewport. And very clearly you can see that even though this one is the global x-axis, but for the object this is the local z-axis. Similarly, instead of the global z-axis, the object is having the local x-axis, and this is the only reason that in the array modifier, when we changed the factor x value, we saw the movement of the pages in the upward and the downward direction, and on changing the factor z value, we saw the movement in the global x-axis, or basically the local z-axis. Now you can keep the number of pages depending upon what kind of book you're creating. For example, let's change the count value to something like 12 or maybe 16, and this will change the number of these pages. After this, the next thing that I'll do is to first disable the show axis, and after that I'll select the Bezier curve, then press tab to enter the edit mode, and I'll try to make this binding part of the book as vertically down as possible. So by using these two vertices, we'll try to achieve the required results. You just have to move this upper point in the x-axis, and then you have to rotate this particular point like this. Then the next thing that we'll do is to ensure that there's minimum gap between any of the two pages. Right now, I've set the value of relative offset in x-axis to minus 0.02 and in the z-axis to minus 0.005. If you want, you can change these values depending upon how close or far you want the pages, but for now, I'll be moving ahead with these values only. Now after all this, our one side of the book is completely ready, but now we want to get the same result for the opposite side. And for this, we'll be using the mirror modifier. In the modifier properties, go to add modifier, then in the generate category, select the mirror modifier. This will add the duplicate or basically the symmetrical result depending upon the axis selected over here. So if I change this to the z-axis and let's also disable the x-axis, then this is how our book is now appearing. We have both the sides of the book ready with 16 pages on this side and 16 on the other. Now if you think that both the duplicate sides are very close to one another or basically they're intersecting, then to fix this, you can go to the Bezier curve again. Let's switch to the edit mode, and by using these vertices and moving them, you can set the distance between them, for example over here, and moving these points around in such a way that at the bottom the pages do intersect with each other, but when they begin to reach this top part, they no longer intersect, but still they are very close to one another. So it's not mandatory at all that you have to keep them at exactly the same distance. It depends upon you and the type of model that you need, that how much exactly will be the space between the two sides of the book. And with this, we also arrived to the end of this video. Today we covered creating the very basic model of an open book, then we used a number of different modifiers and even saw how the usage will change the way our model appears, and after that we used the subdivision surface modifier to smooth out our mesh, and in the end we even created the symmetry or the duplicate part of the book on this other side. In the next video we'll continue with this section as we'll be dealing with a few adjustments in the model, creating the cover based mesh and other related things that will improve our understanding about the usage of different modeling tools and topology in Blender. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel, press that notification bell so that you can get timely updates about the upcoming videos. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next one.